Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
Yes, I am here tonight, and I've got some special gifts for people. I think that's what I think. That's what I'm gonna say.
Well, hopefully, the community is going to be really excited by what we're presenting tonight. So, typically, right, we're often reviewing rules, going over
hmm
armies. We definitely do a lot of beginner videos, right, to walk people through, get them ramped up on the game, or explaining things, or talking about our events, or exciting new GW news. But tonight, we have something special. So, this is something that Evan has been tinkering on for a while. We've been talking about it for quite some time. And while we definitely spend the majority of our time focusing on our events in the community and what we can do with FAQs, we have our legacy router, of course. Everyone's familiar with that. We now have up live on our Discord our terrain pack. We'll be sharing and talking to more people about it soon. But tonight we
Yes.
got inspired, or I say Evan in particular, got very inspired for our first release, our first entry in what will be an ongoing series of what we like to call our Old World Legends, or OWL, our Legacy Supplement. So,
Yes.
Evan, what is a Legacy Supplement? What are we doing here?
Well, so Games Workshop's made it pretty clear that at least for this edition of the game, they are not interested in providing updated rules, references, or models for the 7 legacy factions, which previously were a core and fully functional identity of the game. Now, in Warhammer Fantasy days, there were plenty of editions where some factions would just be totally ignored and not even get any kind of new model miniature release. And that seems completely ridiculous to us of in the 2020s living through this modern renaissance of Games Workshop content, right? But currently in the old world, we have legacy factions who many people say don't buy those, don't play those. You know, maybe there's not going to be a lot of support for it. You might be really bummed out in the future. And I just completely and fundamentally do not accept that at all. And so then why don't we just fast forward until a couple days ago or a week ago, we saw this Chaos Dwarf reveal of these very interesting new models, kind of a modern take
Amazing.
on the original aesthetic of the Chaos Dwarfs, which I definitely love. I know a lot of people have, original Chaos Dwarves, or perhaps you have, proxy Chaos Dwarves, but these new
It's
models,
okay to have both.
yeah.
That's fine.
But you know what? The original Chaos Dwarfs, and this was very common in Warhammer of days gone past, is they would release lore and rules for models that did not exist,
Hmm.
and that is not a thing anymore, right? So one of the things that happened was, hey, this Chaos Dwarf Legacy army that was released was modified and removed any references to any units that no model could possibly exist. So why are we writing rules for some model that doesn't exist? Well, now there is a model. Now there is a Kadai Destroyer model, and that's what we're going to be talking
Oh
about
yeah.
today. That Games Workshop released for Age of Sigmar. That is very clearly a Demon Smith engine inspired by the concept of the Kadai Destroyer from days gone past, the model that never existed, and that's
Hmm.
really really cool. And if we had a company that
Super
wanted
cool.
as much money as possible, one of the things they would do is they would try to make it so that miniatures could be used in multiple games and try to actively support them for people who wanted to play a rank and flank style game or a more skirmish style game. And they would just say, go nuts, buy the stuff, right? But no, they don't do that. So what do we have today? We've got brand new models that you can't really use for old world, which feels wrong.
Well, yeah, it's a mix, right? So
Yeah.
again, there's definitely right. Some people like to just use the exact model that GW says this is the model for this unit, and that's totally cool. In fact, a lot of people feel that way, and there's certainly times that I feel that way, and such. So they don't want to use variation. Then there are other people who absolutely love their older models, their older collection, even if it's
Yes.
not updated, and they just love and they love telling people about it. I bought this model, 30 years ago, and they tell you a story about it, and it's really cool learning some history of the company and the models and how they've evolved over the years. And they have some people that also like to use third-party supplements, so forth and so on. But I think the main thing is for the legacy factions, it's fantastic. We're so happy that they did release at least a baseline rule set that we're able to use in the current edition of
Yes.
the old world. They have not made any commitments to changing legacy into core at this point in time. We are optimistic and hopeful that will change in the future to a degree, maybe one or two this edition, maybe some more next edition. That is pure speculation. We don't actually have any information that anybody else has. But in the meantime, there's also, we notice, even with the existing rule set, there are unit entries that used to exist in previous
Yes.
editions in Warhammer Fantasy that they didn't include in the core baseline legacy faction rule set. And that might have just been literally because they just stopped working on them because they had to switch gears
That
and
is
focus
possible,
their energy
yes.
on the core factions. It might not be anything more than that. But that being said, That model is so amazing with the Chaos Dwarfs. We're like, okay, if we're going to kick off what we're calling, again, this is really more of what we would consider narrative rule set, right? This is not a formal event rule set. This is not something that even we would have at this moment in time until the community says they would want to have it at the events. This is just something for the players out there who are like, that model is so cool. I really, really want to put a Kadai Destroyer in my Chaos Dwarf army and play this game with my friends, maybe at home at the local gaming store. So this is where we're starting, and Evan's going to take us through the thought process of how we came to our unit entry for this model. So that, and we're going to release it again, like everything we do, public, shared with anybody out there who is inspired. Who you just want to put this model on the table. You want some basic Kadai Destroyer rules. Well, here you go.
Yeah, why not? You know, and especially I think Old World is super friendly to narrative gameplay. They release arcane journals that basically fill you with lots of information about these armors of infamy that are often very fluffy and full of narrative potential. They have additional units in there that maybe don't really offer any competitive advantage, but are very interesting or unique aesthetically. Like for example, in the Beastman Arcane Journal, there's a unit of Chaos War Dogs that have like ungors that kind of sheep herding them into battle, and it's like, I mean, cool. That's nice. I don't really need that, but yeah, that seems like something that would exist.
Just cool,
right?
And so, this model is so amazing. We got to see this on the table. We want to motivate and encourage and promote the community. Get your hobby side, get your hobby hat on, get your narrative hat on, get your fun game with a friend. Let's put a Kadai Destroyer on the table. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about. So when I'm looking at this, and again, this comes in this Age of Sigmar like launch army box. So if you really like Chaos Dwarves and you love these new models and you buy this, well, what are you gonna? I mean, you gonna put this on a 60 by 100 mil base and say that this is my Iron Demon, a chariot, an actual
you
train?
can. It's just, weird. But there's other opportunities, and there are certainly people who will just want to proxy it. Honestly, you're playing a Chaos army, even a Warriors of Chaos. You just want a giant, right? You could use this as a giant model. It's totally cool. People are going to find reasons to put this on the table. Absolutely. But we all know there's a Chaos Dwarf players who like, guys, come on. I play Chaos Dwarves. I want my Kadai Destroyer. What can we do?
So, before anything else, let's look at the Kadai Destroyer's rules from Tamarcon, which was a supplement released for Warhammer 8th Edition, Warhammer Fantasy Battles 8th Edition, about 13 years ago. So, here's what a Kadai Destroyer was, and you got kind of the lore and the special rules here. Now, many of the special rules here are very, very similar to some of the special rules in the Chaos Dwarves Legacy books, so we can just use some of those special rules for sure. The stat
translate pretty easily.
Yeah, the stat line, it's relatively fast. I think Kadai Destroyer was originally envisioned as being kind of a infernal molten rock metal bull that was kind of sprinting at the enemy and just bulldozing them over. And they've obviously interpreted that a bit more as like a walking mech thing in the new edition. So it does have very high movement. It has Web Skill 5, Strength 7, Toughness 6, with 6 wounds, very high initiative, and 6 attacks, but it also has Frenzy, and it has D3 attacks from its Frenzy, so it'd get anywhere up to like 9 attacks with Strength 7. And in 8th edition, Strength 7 just meant you would also have like the equivalent of AP, 4? So that would be a lot. So then here's kind of the army book entry. You can see like just a list of special rules, things like it has Unstable, Unbreakable. These are kind of rules.
So it's got a deep aspect to it, right? So that is definitely something we saw before, and Evan will take us through. There are modern units that we can compare or look at for reference in terms of how they're handling demonic machinery type things. So there's a comparable there.
Yeah, and we can also kind of look at roughly the number of points cost in 8th edition, and also how many points it costs for similar type of units in the current game. But it does have Frenzy, which in 8th edition was, I take a leadership test, and if I fail it, I have to charge you. It wasn't just charging all the time. So again, that's much more similar to
that sounds familiar to a recently updated rule, doesn't it?
It does. And then it does give you the D3 extra attacks. So if we look at the Chaos Dwarf book, we can first start off by looking at an Iron Demon, which is very similar in points cost and purpose, being this very kind of durable support unit to add to your list. But an Iron Demon doesn't quite feel transferable because it is a chariot, not a monster. It is also, it only has attacks from crew, so it has 3 strength 3 attacks, that's it, besides the fact that it has an absolute mountain of impact hits and stomps. So this thing is more of a mobile gun platform that can just kind of bulldoze people over, and less so a melee grinding monster. It's also not a demon engine, having like Unbreakable, Unstable, and Regen, for example. So if we
And it definitely
compare,
leans more towards that impact hit side and the durability, right? And so again,
yeah,
we're seeing this is a little more durable, and clearly it's chariot, so it's focused more on impact hits. So that's what we saw with the Iron Demon. That's one of the other reference points we had to work from. But now we need to talk about some of that demon side, don't we?
yeah. So the closest thing we have, and it's almost exactly the same. You can see that from the original 8th edition rules, the Kadai Fireborn and the Kadai Destroyer were under the same profile with many of the same special rules. The only thing was basically just the
Mhm.
stats that were kind of different, right? So a Kadai Fireborn in Old World, very similar stats to the original 8th edition rules, although I think they have 2 wounds instead of 3 for some mysterious reason. And then we see here Burning Body. So that's kind of people in base contact with you suffer like strength 3 flaming hits at the start of the combat
Mhm.
phase because they're literally just like giving off heat because they're actually on fire. Um,
Because it's awesome.
yeah, they have flaming attacks. Immune to Psychology, Unbreakable, Unstable, Warp Spawn, and Regen. That is essentially I am a demon engine. I am a flaming demon from hell. Those are the special rules you get when you have that. So
Mhm.
immunopsychology, unbreakable. That's I don't care about running away or fleeing. I just sit there. But I do have unstable, so combat res
Yeah.
can just make them kind of explode into dust. But on the other hand, they do have regen, so regular weapons and damage could potentially bounce off. And yet they also
Mhm.
have warp spawn, which many people don't know what it does because I think there's like 4 units in the game that have warp spawn besides the things that are in the Demons of Chaos book. Warp spawn means that if you have the regeneration rule, it is removed by having a magical attack struck against you. So the regen, even though regen is very strong in this edition, if you have magical attacks used against you, you don't have regen against those wounds in the core rules. Okay.
Yeah, of course, in our errata, we play that differently because basically that makes the demon army almost unplayable, which is why in our errata and other communities have done the similar thing with allowing them to keep their ward save and their region safe. But that's a different topic for a different video that we've talked about
Yes.
in the past. But the point is, we have reference points to a big war machine from Chaos Dwarfs in current. We have reference to the old rules and kind of what they were going for, and seeing the difference of okay, the Iron Demon is a little more durable and a little more bad impact hits, versus the Kadai Destroyer is a little more offense, a little faster, still very strong, but then he also has that demon aspect to him. And
Right.
so we definitely see a lot, almost one for one, a lot of those older rules brought into the newer rules. And the demon rules we see for the Kadai Destroyer or Fireborn here are very similar to the other demons, demon princes, and other demons we see in 8th edition. So there's a lot of applicables. But we had one more reference you were looking at too, right, Evan?
Yeah, so most similar to essentially a giant walking demon robot that both fights you in close combat and shoots you with, cannons and such, is a soul grinder.
Hmm.
So a soul grinder
Yep.
is pretty mobile. It has pretty high strength, toughness, and wounds. Basically, any kind of behemoth generally starts with strength 6, toughness 6, wound 6. That's pretty
Yeah,
common.
the six profile. Yep.
Yeah, it has 4 attacks, but does have a very strong weapon, or it can kind of swap that out for other weapon options depending on kind of what close combat rules you want. It's
Hmm.
255 points. So again, a behemoth that has toughness 6, 6 wounds is generally in the 200 to 300 point range. That's kind of roughly where they sit. Something like a Dragon Ogre Shaggoth kind of is perhaps a bit of an exception to that, as being one of the only very expensive monsters that's not toughness 6 with 6 wounds.
And for comparable out there, a Chaos Dragon is baseline 285 points,
Yeah,
just for comparison there.
yeah.
Okay.
Now, normally, the thing is, a Chaos Dragon, if you could just kind of buy it by itself, it wouldn't necessarily be as strong as when you kind of mount a character on it. For example,
It
the
does
Warfire
help to have a
Dragon.
Chaos Lord on top, doesn't it?
Yeah, and a Warfire Dragon is Strength 6, Toughness 6, Wound 6 with,
Mhm.
and it could be a wizard, and it starts around like 280, 300 points.
Yep.
Okay. Um, so the main thing to point out here, though, is that a Soul Grinder has shooting. It has kind of a flaming missile weapon that's very similar to a warp, like a warp fire thrower, where it's Strength 5 AP1 instead of the main book version is Strength 4 AP1 with the Column of Fire rule that kind of shoots a flame template forward out on top of people. So this is an upgraded version of a flame cannon. But you can switch it out for other options of things that are kind of like there's kind of like a cannonball, or there's one that's a bit more like a grape shot that it can fire at people. So
Yep.
obviously multiple weapon options. This one also has reserve move, so it's very good at kind of moving into base contact and then kind of like moving around and dodging and shooting. It's actually surprisingly maneuverable. And then it has Furious Charge, so even though it has 4 attacks base, it gets up to 5 when it charges you, and it has an absolute mountain
Mhm.
of stomp attacks. So the kind of like dragon and or giant
Yeah, very
stomp attack
stompy.
profile.
Which makes sense. It's got all the big claw legs and such. So, all right. So we have reference point of the Soul
Yeah.
Grinder for kind of that monstrous demon hybrid, something that's actually not that far off. Then we have the Fireborn in terms of, okay, more of that demonic side, more of that Chaos Dwarf fire demon side.
Yeah.
And then we have the Iron Demon in terms of the War Machine, and it's the difference between that and the Kadai Destroyer. And then this gives point references. So I'll put all that together. Evan, where did we net out for the Kadai Destroyer?
Okay, so I started with something a little bit different than this, and I got a lot of feedback from people, and gave people the input, gave people kind of the inspiration, and what my goal was.
Yeah,
My goal
definitely
was,
community effort for sure.
yeah, community effort. My goal was to try to get a read on what kind of rules could you use to represent this thing in a relatively non-offensive way that just makes sense and would feel better than putting this thing on a 60 by 100 base and just saying, yeah, it's an Iron Demon, I guess. I don't know. And this is where I got to. So similar to the stat line of the 8th edition, the things I changed, I lowered its movement a little bit because it is not a bull on all four legs kind of sprinting at you. So
Nope.
this thing is kind of walking a little bit slower. So I kind of made it movement 8, and it does not have swift stride. You'll see that later on. So this thing can move across the battlefield relatively quickly, similar to how a Soul Grinder can have reserve move and still shoot at you. This thing can march or it can charge and stuff.
It's still pretty good. Yep.
Yeah. So it has weapon skill and ballistic skills, strength, toughness, and wounds. Those are all exactly the same as the 8th edition profile. So that kind of just made sense to use directly. The initiative is lowered because most characters, especially monsters in this edition, have much lower initiative than they used to. For example, every single elf warrior, be them a spearman or whatever, had at least initiative 5 in the previous 8th edition, and now they're only 4. So that's just a good example of how initiative is generally kind of a thing that is more narrow in the band. In fact, they've actually increased the initiative of some units, like Orc Boys. It used to be initiative 2, and now they're 3, just to make initiative
Apparently
more
they did
often.
take it down.
Yeah, they kind of
Yeah.
make the initiative more
And
often the same, I think.
I think the biggest difference is again similar to the Statline, like we said before. The Iron Demon has the strength, has the toughness 7. This is more the toughness 6. Again, looking at what we see the differences between the Iron Demon and the Destroyer.
Right. So then I lowered its attack slightly from 6 to 5 because of something we'll see later. Again, because the original Kadai Destroyer rules was based around this idea of like basically a bull that's just running at you and just goring you with its talons and its horns. And this model is much more kind of this like walking machine that either battles you to death with its 2 big maracas or its maces, or it's got these like infernal looking cannons where I wouldn't want to be standing on the other side of that. So we're going to come back to that. We're going to come back to the points too, because again, you got to read all the special rules before you can understand anything like that. For base size, I'm totally eyeballing this because again, I mean, this model was previewed a couple days ago. No one has their hands on this yet, but I'm eyeballing that it could either be kind of 75 by 50 with like the wide side facing forward, kind of like a Tomb King Scorpion is on that base size, or maybe use the brand new 100mm square base from the Cathay balloon kit, which is also possible as a good proxy size for how.
And we'll get a better sense once we actually get our hands on it. But it did not, from what they showed on the preview, it didn't look like truly the size of like the new like Vampire Lord Zombie Dragon or something.
No,
That
not
big.
that big.
It did look more kind of golem size, which is why these are our initial thoughts. Once we get to our hands on one of these actual models, we certainly might need to revise this relative to what it actually feels like.
And just to be clear, just because it's not absolutely enormous does not mean it should not be high strength, toughness 6, wound 6, something like that. There are a lot of monsters in the old world that do have toughness 6, wound 6, a lot of attacks, very high strength, who are tiny. I mean, for example, like the cockatrice is strength 5 and toughness 5 or whatever, but it's actually like this big. And then the official Shaggoth model is only slightly bigger than a Dragon Ogre, and it is strength 6, toughness 5, 5 wounds.
Keep in mind, we're dealing with model ranges who have gone through different scales from 28mm to now 32 scale. Like, this is a huge history of model ranges in terms of profile to stat. Anyway, I would exactly right. You can't take the model verbatim in terms of the stat line. What we're focused on is what would be fun, what would players want to get out of this unit profile, what's going to be exciting for them to hang out, have a great time with their friend, play a game, and put one of these on the table.
Yeah, okay, so let's go to the equipment. So we've got hand weapon because everyone has that. The Infernal Maul is essentially what I'm calling their the melee weapon that they have. If you build it with the kind of
demon mace thing.
the 2 demon maces, That's kind of what the default profile is. And then we have full plate armor as representing its actual, I mean, its plate armor around it. So I feel like that kind of makes sense.
Hmm.
No better than that. Has two options. So similar to an Iron Demon, and as far as I can tell, the previous rules as well, a Kadai Destroyer can have the Hellbound rule for 35 points, which gives it the 6-up ward save and magical attacks on its attacks, but also if it rolls a misfire, it suffers the worst one worst result on it, and a couple other downsides like that. So that makes sense that these kind of demon engine type units can be upgraded to have Hellbound. And then
Hmm.
the other option is you can replace extra attacks D3, which is the representation of having two maces, like one in each hand, will give you extra attacks,
Hmm.
with having a magma cannon. So I'm imagining that if someone was going to buy Chaos Dwarfs and they wanted to build an army for just Old World, perhaps what you might want is to model it with one mace in one hand and one magma like fire throwing thing in the other, and so
Hmm.
to kind of buck the trend of the Age of Sigmar deployment here, because it would make sense to be able to actually have a unit on the table that could kind of do both. And so if you want to do that, you could have replace extra attacks D3 with now you can shoot stuff. And if you have a large target that actually likes walking towards the enemy, a fire thrower would be quite useful, especially in the infantry meta when the infantry might
Hmm.
actually be a little scary to charge. If you charge into them and you don't do a lot of damage somehow, you could actually take a couple crumble wounds and back up a few inches, and then all of a sudden they're charging you. And so
But I
I
think
think
the main thing is we wanted to make sure there's a representation
yeah,
for weapon
yeah,
options in terms of what we see with the kit,
yeah,
and it seemed very
definitely.
appropriate basing it off of what we see on the Iron Demon. And again, the difference: the Iron Demon is a little bit stronger, but otherwise the weapon, the ranged weapon is of that is very similar.
And it's a different ranged weapon because, for example, these are two massive flame cannons, but the Iron Demon
Yep,
has access to what's essentially an organ gun. So if you were to
it's
try to
different.
proxy this as just, hey, this is my Iron Demon, well, it doesn't. I mean, me personally, I wouldn't want to do that because I'm like looking at these big flame cannons and then I'm rolling to hit.
Player
I just
choice, and
doesn't
maybe
really make
someone
sense
wants
to
to
me.
hobby up an organ gun on it instead. So I'm confident we're going to see some really creative hobby skills out there as people convert this. But all right, let's keep going.
So the Infernal Maul is essentially it's just melee attack. It
Yep.
has Strength User, AP2, and Flaming attacks. That's just seems relatively standard for a monster like this, whether it's like
Yep.
kind of like
Behemoth
Rending
having a
Claws.
-2 AP,
Yeah,
pretty standard.
yeah, very very standard here. And then let's look at its special rules. So the one that's kind of relevant to having the weapons is extra attacks D3. So if you're gonna have the two mauls, you can keep extra attacks D3, and then you have quite a decent output, especially into just smashing people up on kind of on the charge, that kind of thing. But what else
You
special
started
rules?
with the blazing body,
Yeah, so
right? So that's
Blazing
that
Body,
fire demon thing.
yeah, that's the same thing we see on the Kadai Fireborn and
Makes
on
sense.
both of the Tauruses, because they're also kind of flaming bulls as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
Black Shard Armor is a special rule from Chaos Dwarfs that basically just gives them 5 ward save against flaming attacks, which when you're on
Seems
fire makes
appropriate.
sense. In 8th edition, it was a 2+ ward save against flaming attacks.
Well, that's 8th edition. We're focused on this edition.
Yes. And then here's all the rules that basically seem like they have to be there because it's a large behemoth monster. So it's close order, large target, terror, and timber. So very much like a giant type profile.
You
Um,
got a little bit of a giant in there with the timber aspect to represent what the model has turned into, right?
mhm. And then because it is a very aggressive melee monster, we put impact hits so that when you do kind of make that charge, you got a good damage output into that rank of infantry where they're going to have 2 ranks stabbing back at
Still a
you.
demon bull engine. It's just on standing upright. So it's still definitely
Yeah,
going to gore you when it's charging in.
I'm just imagining the from Total War Warhammer when you have a Doom Bull and it charges a unit of infantry, it does like a front flip and just kind of like rolls through them like a wrecking ball. I can imagine you could do
This
that
is
with this
awesome.
with that thing. And some stomp attacks. D6 plus 1 has always been a bit of a bugbear because every time you roll a 6, you're like, oh, I'm sorry. And you just start apologizing to the other person. So it feels better to have it
But
not be as much as that.
but at the same time, this model has quite a few melee attacks on its
It
profile to
does.
begin with, especially if you have the two melee weapons.
Yeah.
So again, it feels much more appropriate, especially because it also has impact hits. So again, it is not as many impact hits as the Iron Demon, but it has effectively more base profile attacks. So this feels more appropriate when through we were discussing it in terms of, and it also we wanted to feel different, so it's not just identical to every other behemoth that's out there.
Yes. All right. So now let's get to all the special rules, and I've kind of grouped them by like where they came from. So here's all the special rules that come because it's very similar to the Kadai. Remember that in 8th edition, the Kadai Destroyer and the Kadai Fireborn had exactly the same special rules. They just had different stats.
Mhm.
So we have Unbreakable, Unstable, Immune to Psychology, Regeneration 5+, and Warp Spawned. So that's what you're going to see here on the Kadai Fireborn. And again, with Unstable, all you have to do is just have some combat res, and all of a sudden the sky does blow up. So that always works.
But not Frenzy.
Yes, and then because in eighth edition, Frenzy wasn't as punishing, and many units that used to have it now have Impetuous. We feel that it probably makes the most sense for something especially like this to have Impetuous instead, so you can at the very least take some kind of a test to see whether you have to charge. But on the off chance you fail it, this thing just goes barreling towards the enemy, and I guess that makes sense. Especially if you try to bring the Magma Cannon version. If it did have Frenzy and had no ability to resist charging, that would be very much of a bummer, I think.
Yeah, that'd be a little punishing. There we go.
Yeah.
So Kadai Destroyer, awesome job for Evan and everyone else who contributed to this. Really appreciate it. And like I said, this is kind of going to be this is our first entry in what we hope will be an ongoing series. Again, this is our legacy supplement, right?
Yes.
So these are really narrative rules that we're just releasing to the community in terms of, hey, there are cool things that do have models equivalents in AOS or maybe other game systems, things that had rules in the past that don't currently have rules. We'd love to see people put them on the table. So we're going to over the coming months, continue to hopefully update this with more and more unit entries. But we just got so inspired by this model is so amazing. We really want people to put it on the table. People are like, guys, that's a Kadai Destroyer. Like, I wish I had rules for that. Well, here you go. Here's our thoughts on this. Please let us know right in the comments what your thoughts are.
Absolutely.
This is like all our other documents, our FAQ, our errata. This is an evolving living document. So this is the first entry of version 1.0 of the document, and we're going to keep evolving this based upon community feedback into the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, if you have any thoughts or opinions about maybe something I missed or balance change, something like that, I would love to know about that. If you've started using this and you've been beating up your friends with it, also tell me. I would love to know about that. That sounds great. And you can always join our Discord and come there and discuss with us things like this or other legacy changes or just things that are going on in your local meta or different lists you're trying. That's always a good place to be. We love welcoming new people to our Discord.
Awesome. All right. And then please take screenshots if you get this on a square base. I want to see all the cool hobby work that everybody's doing.
Absolutely.
All right. I think that takes care of our first release for the supplement. Evan, any last words?
Just that I think that now it'll be even easier to stay legendary.
Okay. We'll see you all next time.
Work it in every week, just a little bit.
We'll find a way. All right, we'll see you later.
Okay.